уничтожена. Цель подбита. Цель уничтожена.
Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. I thought today we would talk about the Strela-10M2. This is a vehicle which has caused a lot of controversy over the last few months, because to be quite honest, it's massively unbalanced. It's an insanely powerful vehicle in the game right now, and it sits at a lower BR compared to a lot of other vehicles that are definitely worse than it. The Strela-10M2 has some insane missiles on it, which are incredibly hard to actually deal with. Even though they're supposed to be flareable, they really don't care about the flare mechanic. As long as you have locked onto the plane in the first place and not the flare, the missile will go for the plane, no matter how many countermeasures are thrown out. Even with the Moore system and the good old system on the F-111, the missile will still hit, which is just nuts. This vehicle is at 9.3 and sits in the lineup I've been playing quite a lot with the Sprut, the Pancake Tank and the T-72. It's a really nice addition to the lineup and has massively contributed to a lot of the success that I've had in Ground Realistic and even Ground Arcade, where I used this yesterday to be able to grind out a star and spade the vehicle to finish it off. We're able to do a lot in this thing, and in Ground Arcade it is once again just crazily imbalanced because you know where they're coming from. The lock time on the missile is super short and you can just bop, bop, bop and then even just get a reload for free, which is just nuts. So if you want to kind of spade this out, doing it in arcade is really easy to do. In realistic it's pretty easy to do too. You just got to stay away from the spawn. It also gets scouting, so it does have a secondary effect. It can kind of tell it can tell your teammates where players are, but it doesn't really have an armament which can deal with ground vehicles, which is why it has scouting. It only has a PKMB machine gun on it. Now, the crazy thing for me when I think about this vehicle is it is, of course, on the MTLB chassis with the PKMB machine gun. All is really nice. I just wish that PKMB machine gun was on the Sturm S, so therefore you wouldn't lose to a fence in a lot of scenarios when playing that thing, since the Sturm S just feels horrific to play, whereas the Strela-M2, because you have the machine gun, but also because you have the 9M37Ms, is really nice to play. This thing doesn't have a functional radar in the classic way. It does have a tracking radar director, but you're not really ever going to use that. The only time you are going to use that mechanic is if you are struggling to lock on to specific helicopters which are a little bit further away and have access to IRCM kind of systems on the helicopter themselves. The vast majority of the time, the tracking director is pretty useless, and therefore you have to rely on knowing where the enemies spawn in a lot of cases, and also knowing where they kind of move into. On a lot of maps now, they have added a lot of cloud cover or haze, so it's a little bit harder to be able to see what's going on, but people still spawn in the same place, and if they try and increase in altitude, you usually can see a lot of trails that come in. Lots of CAS vehicles right now have access to some pretty crazy guided munitions, and the Strela around this BR is probably one of the only counters that exist at a decent distance compared to a lot of other IR machines. So what is it with this 9M37M missile? Well, first of all, it has a launch range of 5 kilometers. It also has an all-aspect lock of 3.2 kilometers, which is a lie. It can actually lock way longer than that, or at least it feels like it can, from a lot of vehicles, especially if they have a large heat signature. It has a maximum overload of 20 Gs, but it definitely is able to turn incredibly quickly while it's burning in its missile guidance time of 16 seconds, and is able to pull ridiculous amounts of Gs to a point where I actually think that it's bugged, because it turns way faster than a lot of other machines with their missiles at a similar BR. The vehicle doesn't really have anything else, though. It doesn't get thermals, it doesn't get MVDs, it doesn't get a search radar, it doesn't really get, well, it doesn't get smoke grenades, like, it doesn't have anything else. It's just really good at this one job. So if you actually have a look at this thing, and even from a stock configuration where you have the same missile, and the only things you really have to worry about from, you know, a modification point of view is trying to get that missile on target, so stuff like the horizontal drive and the elevation mechanism, every other modification is pretty much useless in this vehicle. So it just makes it super easy to play. It also has more survivability than other MTLB stuff like the Sturm because it has a 3-man crew. You have, of course, the gunner and then also the commander and the driver. So if you get shot in the front, you don't always necessarily die, which in stuff like the Sturm you do because it's only a 2-man crew. One thing to mention, though, is the launcher itself. If somebody is firing HE or some kind of derivative of HE, it can set off the missiles and you can get overpressured from the damage from the top thing. So you've got to be a bit careful there, otherwise you will just kind of get nuked. It is easily the best IR missile launcher in the game just by itself at its current BR, and you really have to have a think. Is it better to raise this vehicle? Right now, when we have a look at it, it's at 9.3, and if you have a look at some of the other ones, such as the Chaparral, which is at 9.3, you know, you have to basically get a lot of modifications before it's even that useful to have the same capabilities of the Strela, which is a big thing, by the way, especially when it comes to AAs, because it can take quite a long time to get the modifications. When you have a look at stuff like the Ozelot, for example, the Ozelot is literally a higher BR than it because it gets access to that radar and, you know, the ability to not really be seen. The Stormer is hilarious. The fact that the Stormer is 10.3 compared to this thing, even though this has much more capabilities, and there is just so many more vehicles which are higher BR than it that just shouldn't be at the end of the day. Just to kind of give you an idea of how long it was to spade this thing. So in arcade, when I played it, I played 37 matches, 35% win rate, which is not really surprising. It felt like when I wasn't contributing to the capture points, we were just getting run over. But 128 air kills, 28 deaths. There were many games where I had 7 or 8 air kills to 2 spawns, which is just nuts. And then, in realistic, I had 67 battles in the Strela, 72 air kills, 28 deaths, 61% win rate, showing its usefulness as a kind of second spawn to be able to kind of smash things around. The only counter to this thing from an air point of view is IRCMs on helicopters, and most helicopters around the BR you'll find don't really have access to stuff like that. But yeah, the missile itself on this needs to be looked at. It definitely isn't performing how its stat card says, or if this is performing how the stat card says, then there's a lot of other missiles that need some extreme buffs, because it's crazy how effective this is, especially from the fact that it doesn't seem to care about flares after launch, and also at the same time, it's super fast and incredibly maneuverable. And yes, this vehicle only has the missile, it doesn't really have anything else, but sometimes that's all vehicles need to be extremely powerful. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank Schnitzel Stroker, Brendan Quinn, Vilneus, Character Fuel, Carrion Crow, Nicholas Richardson, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, B. Young, Opium Prime, Masonocrat, Lafouche, Alan Hacker, Sem Arslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.